Today my guest is Julie Lerman. Julie, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm great. I'm excited to have you on my show because I'm a big fan of your book, Programming
Awesome.
Entity
It's nice
Framework.
to meet you in person finally.
And what do you do?
What do I do?
For a living, I mean.
For a living? Oh, well, I'm independent.
Ah.
So I do a little bit of everything to support my book writing habit and my conference speaking habit. Mostly these days I'm doing mentoring. So I mentor development teams. Mostly development teams that are looking for help with entity framework, but others as well. I do mentoring remotely, but what's really, really fun is going and getting locked in a room with a team for 2 or 3 days and just hashing through all their problems.
It does sound like fun. And
then they pay me.
And you're getting paid to do what you love. That's awesome. Your name is associated with entity framework like very few people are associated with very few things. I mean, people think entity framework.
I lucked out.
They look at the dictionary, they see your picture.
I lucked out.
What's going on with entity framework now and with your relationship with it?
For me, I think all the focus is really on the new stuff that came out with Entity Framework 4.1, which as of yesterday is now 4.2 because they released an update to it.
Oh, I missed that.
It's just mostly a couple of small bug fixes.
Okay, some polish on the unicorn.
Yeah, that's right, the horn of the unicorn. And also that the teams is, in my perspective, kind of repositioning entity framework, because another blog post I had a few weeks ago, they were saying that from now on, the stuff, the part of entity framework that's in .NET, that's released with .NET, they consider that the core.
Okay.
And if you've looked at Code First or DB Context, or DB Context, not Code First doesn't fit into that. But if you've looked at
just real quickly, Code First was a feature that was released with Entity Framework 4.1.
Along with DB Context.
And DB Context came with 4.1 as well. Okay.
Right. So what's interesting about DB Context in relation to now thinking of the .NET 4 stuff as the core Entity Framework API is that the DB Context sits on top of the object context.
Okay.
It's a much smaller surface area, easier to use. They took a lot of the most common tasks that we do with object context, and that's exposed by DB Context, but they also took things that were really hard that, like, somebody like me, I dig in and I know how to do stuff inside of object context, but it's really hard to code. So they found things that people were doing frequently and having a hard time doing them because you really have to dig into the API to do them, and created much simpler methods in the DB context.
Give me an example.
Oh, one of my favorites is that there's a method called local property on DB set. So you go from a DB context to a DB set. A DB set is like an object set, but it's a better, easier to use one in Entity Framework 4.1. And in DB set, the problem is a lot of people will want to see they want to look at the objects that are being tracked. So they'll inadvertently execute a query to do that because they're saying, my context contacts is too hard to say. How about employees?
All right.
So my context.employees.count, because they're trying to figure out how many employees the context is tracking.
Okay.
But what they're really doing is executing a query on the database, and they're going to get back the number of employees in the database.
Right.
They don't realize that.
And that's a hard thing for people that are using lazy loading to get their head around. When do I actually hit the database? When is the database?
Always. Every time you execute a query, you're hitting the database.
But we don't explicitly, what you just did there wasn't explicitly execute a query. I'm just saying .count.
Yeah.
Select count of, there's no SQL I'm writing.
Right.
It's abstracted away from me.
So what you need to do with object context is you have to you start with the context. Context has an object state manager. So you have to go into the object state manager. That's how you're going to start seeing what it's keeping track of. not what's in the database.
Oh, okay.
So you got to dig into the object state manager, and then you have to call get object state entries, and then you have to tell it which states you want, all the added ones, the unchanged ones, the modified ones, and the deleted ones. You can't just say get them because you have to pass in state.
Okay.
And then you have to do type checking and casting and all kinds of crazy stuff to get back objects that are being tracked. So now they have mycontext.employees.local dot blah 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 where that. So they have this local method.
Sort of the cached properties that are just stored in the context.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to go back to the database to get.
That's right.
All right. Well, how does context know number of employees without hitting the database?
Well, if you want to find out how many the context is tracking
Oh, okay.
versus how many are in the database.
Oh, I see. So this might be a query that I ran a while ago. Be a disconnected data set or some kind?
You're not disconnected if you're using the context. So the scenario maybe is you ran a query and you pulled back a whole bunch of employees and you're doing some interaction with those employees. Then you want to do something, you don't have maybe you don't have a list, like a variable that represents the list of employees.
Okay.
You don't have some way to reach those instances. But the context knows about those instances.
Okay.
So you can say, hey, context, I'm interested in those instances you're tracking. Right? So you could do this. You can do this with object context, but it's very unwieldy and very undiscoverable.
Makes that just much
local.
Easier. Or local.
Local, right, but it's like, oh, local, duh, right? So there's all kinds of things like that in the DB context and DB set, in this new API that includes all of these things that just make things a lot easier to work with. Also, state management, it's easier to work with state management. They've done a lot to make it easier to handle concurrency issues.
Okay.
Just so you don't have to understand the underneath layers all the time.
Describe for me the pattern to use for handling concurrency in a multi-user system. If I want optimistic concurrency, but I still want to have, you recommend a pattern for maintaining consistency in the database with EF?
Well, Entity Framework does support optimistic concurrency by default. So you set, typically you use something like a row version or a timestamp field. So once you've let Entity Framework know which field you're interested in doing concurrent tracking, then any time that you do an update or a delete, it will automatically also double check that value to make sure that hasn't been changed in the database since then.
Okay.
And then if something has been changed, then you get a concurrency exception that comes back when the update says, I couldn't do this because this was the problem. So it gives you a concurrency exception on the first one. You might have 20.
Right.
The first one might have been great. The second one might have been a concurrency exception. It stops everything else. Nothing else is happening. And then what's interesting, well, with object context, you had a way of just saying, refresh all or this or that. But the thing that you want to be able to do sometimes when you really, maybe you want to log it or something like that, is get at all that concurrency information. What was the original value? What's the current value in there? And one of the new things they give you also is you can actually say, okay, I'm looking at this property in this instance. Can you go tell me what the database value is for that one? So instead of executing a query, you could just say, get the database value. So they just expose things at a higher level.
So you know in
it's
advance
easier.
whether or not that's changed.
It depends on how you're going to do it. I mean, I just kind of let Entity Framework do it the way it's designed to, which is to include that concurrency value in the update, and as a part of the search parameter along with a key.
Okay.
So that just happens naturally. So you don't have to write all this extra logic.
Is there anything interesting happening with the 4.2 release that developers should be aware of?
It has a new name.
What's the new name? Just the
Entity
two?
Framework 4.2.
That's not it. Magic Universe.
It's available by NuGet. As a matter of fact, if you go now onto NuGet to get Entity Framework, it will automatically be 4.2.
Okay.
So we don't have all these different versions going around. It just fixes a few bugs. Originally, they released this as Entity Framework 4.1 Update 1, which was kind of a weird name, to fix like one or two small bugs.
Oh, okay. Almost like
But that release broke something.
Oh,
And it broke something that was needed by third-party tools, especially the profilers. So EFProf, the profiler that LLBL Gen was just about to release, they've released it now. It broke all the profilers. So it also now, the 4.2 now has the fix
okay.
that came from that earlier one.
Okay.
So none of the new big stuff is in 4.2. It's just really bug changes.
Okay. And you're writing about all this stuff right now, right?
I'm trying to keep up with it.
All right. So you already had this, I think there were 4,000 pages in the first one.
Felt like it.
And
832, I think it
there were
says.
832, and that's the book that I own. I actually own the second edition of that book. So that's
Oh, that's the 900-page book.
That's the one that I own. And but you've added another one, I'll call it addendum.
Yeah, these
That's
are.
French writing, right?
Yeah, O'Reilly has a path they're going down to try to get books out more quickly instead of writing the big, huge books, to write them kind of more fluidly. And they refer to them as real-time books.
Okay.
So I've just finished writing a real-time book on Code First, just the mappings, how to do the mappings and the database initialization, how things work, and how to have really tight control over how the mappings work and configurations and what the convention does. And I wrote that. I got a partner in crime this time, Rowan Miller from the Entity Framework team, and he was one of the guys on Code First, so he knows the stuff. He wrote the advanced chapters.
And you've already started it. Is that, you're working
So
on
that
it, you're
one's
waiting for it to get-
essentially done.
It's not printed yet. But,
Not out yet because we're just going to get the proof back shortly and do last changes to it. So it should be out sometime this month, November.
And you started another real-time book, right?
We started the next one, which is DB Context API. And that one is just going to focus on what's in the DB context, things like local and find and basic querying, and how to take advantage of all of the things that are in the DB context, as well as the new validation API and the enhanced state management. So we're going to focus on just using those things, not incorporating them in big examples.
Right.
Because what that would do is make the book bigger and take much longer to get out.
Well, that's good. Maybe that'll be
So
the next book.
that'll be the next book. Me, who said never writing another book
thought I
again.
remember you
But
saying
they're
something.
little, they don't count
That's
as
how it starts.
much. They're not quite as painful. Yeah, that's how it starts. Just a drag.
Well, we'll definitely look for that. Anything else that you want to talk about?
No, I'm looking forward to ski season in Vermont. I'm looking forward to Code Mesh in the middle of
I'll
January
be
by
there.
the
I'm
pools.
speaking there.
Yeah, I'm excited. I've heard so much about Code Mesh.
You're going to like it.
I've heard I'm going to love it, so I'm looking forward to that.
Julie, thank you so much.
Great to meet you.
Great meeting
Thanks
you.
so much. Because I live in Vermont, a lot of my friends really worry that we don't have appropriate technology in our house. But I always let them know we really do have flush toilets and we don't use an outhouse.